Hey students, this is lesson 322. We're going to do some more percent problems here, and specifically we're going to find out what it's like to take a percent of a percent. So think about this to start with, and we'll do this think and discuss here. It says increase 100 by 20%. So I'm going to add 20% of 100 onto 100, and since percent means out of 100, if I take 20% of 100, I get 20. So I'm just going to add 20 to 100 to increase it by 20%. So that's 120. Now we're going to decrease the result by 20. And intuitively, we might think that we just go back to what we started from. But if we look at the results more closely, if I figure out what 20% of this 120 is, so I'll do a proportion to figure that out. So 20 over 100. And we want it out of 120, so that's the whole. Put an X there. So now I'm going to do 120 times 20. And then divide that by 100. And when I do that, I get 24. Now I'm going to take that off of 120, so I'm backing off. And that equals 96. So I do not end up with what I started with. And the reason we don't end up with what we started is because originally I took 20% of 100, but when I backed up, I took 20% of a higher number, 120, and if I take the same percent of a higher number, it's going to be a higher number. So I'm taking off more than I originally added on. All right, so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at here. So we have these two stores, Barry's Bargain Basement Sale. And the deal is at Barry's, he keeps progressively making the discounts more depending on how old the item is. 1 month old, 10% off, 2 months old, 20% off, 3 months old, 30% off, 4 months old, he's going to take 50% off the original price. And then at Steve's Super Savings Stores, you get 10% off if it's been there for 2 months, and another 20% off of that reduced price if it's been there for 3 months, another 30% off that reduced price if it's been there for longer than 3 months. So they're both progressively getting more and more discount. So let's just do a sale price here to get used to this idea. So Rashonda went to Barry's and bought a pair of jeans. The jeans had been in the store for 1 month. The original price was $40. What was the sale price? Well, after 1 month at Barry's, you get 10% off. So we have to take 10% off of $40. So if we figure out what 10% of 40 is, so that's this proportion. That's 4. So we need to take that off. 40 minus 4 is 36. And just to reiterate another way to figure that out, and we'll find that out from this problem. It says what percent of the original price was the sale price? So if I look at 36, compare that to the original price of 40, what percent is that? And so now if I take 36 times 100 and divide that by 40, I get 90. So my answer to this is 90%. So thinking about that for a second here, I could have just taken 90% of 40 to get the 10% off. And I'm just going to show you a quick way to do that. If I want 90% of something, like 40, normally we would take 40 times 90 and divide by 100. We could also do 90 divided by 100 first, and that's going to equal the decimal 0.9. And then I can just multiply that by 40 to get 90% of 40, which is the same as 10% off. And if you try that math, you get 36, which is a sale price all in one shot. So Essentially what I'm saying here is if you want to take 10% off, multiply by 0.9 or 90%. If you want to take 20% off, think about that for a second, you would multiply by 80% because you're left with 80% if you take 20% off, and so on. So we're going to use that idea a little bit as we're doing this lesson today. So Julia was a smart shopper. The pair of shoes she wanted had an original price of $50 at both Barry's and Steve's. The shoes had been in both stores for 2 months. So 2 months in Barry's gives you 20% off. So I'm going to do that. So Barry's. What I'm going to do is, so I'm going to take 20% off the price. That'll leave me with 80% of the original price. When you take 20% off, you're left with 80%. So I'm going to use this 80%. You divide that by 100, that's 0.80, and just multiply that by 50, and that equals 40. So if you take 20% off, you're left with 80%, and that's $40 at Barry's. Now at Steve's, these shoes, after 2 months, you get 20% off the already reduced price, and the already reduced price is 10% off. So we have to take our $50, and we need to take 10% off. Well, if you take 10% off, you're left with 90% of the price. And the decimal for 90% is just 90 divided by 100, which is 0.90, and that's $45. So after 1 month at Steve's, you get $45. You pay $45, and then for the if they've been in there for 2 months, you get 20% off that already reduced price. And we saw from the last example that to get 20% off, you multiply by 0.80. And 45 times 0.80 is 36. So you can see that it's a better deal at Steve's. You get it for $4 cheaper when you do it this way. All right, let's go to the next page. We'll do one more problem here. We're going to do number 5. It said Oscar found an item originally marked at $100. It had been in both stores for more than 4 months. So we're going to calculate the discount price. It varies. If it's been in the store for more than 4 months, you get 50% off. Okay? And so we're going to just take that 100, and if you get 50% off, that means you're left with 50%. So we can just multiply that by the decimal for 50%, which is 0.50, and that's $50. So it varies. We're going to pay $50. At Steve's, it's a little more complicated. At Steve's, you get 10% off the first month, 20% off that reduced price the second month, and then 30% off in the end. So if you take 10% off, you're left with 90%. If you take 20% off, you're left with 80%. And if you take 30, you're left with 70%. So at Steve's, we're going to start with the 100. And to get the first 10% off, we're going to multiply by 0.9. To get the second 20% off of that price, we're going to multiply by 0.8, which is 80%. And for the last discount, we're going to multiply by 0.7 to get that last discount. And when we do that, all that, and it almost looks like we're getting a 60% discount, but watch what happens. If you multiply 100 times 0.9, that's 90, times 0.8 is 72, times 0.7 is $50.40. So in the ad for Steve's, which claims it won't be undersold, is that true? That Steve's prices are better than Barry's? And you can see from this result that even though it looks like you're getting more discounts from Steve, because he keeps taking it off of the already reduced price, you actually come out better by just taking 50% off one time from berries. All right? Go ahead and try a couple problems on your own, and then we'll talk about this more in class next time we meet.